This podcast is brought to you by Blackaby Ministries International. To find out more, visit blackaby.org.
Well, thanks for listening to the Richard Blackaby Leadership Podcast. I'm Sam Camp, and I'm so happy to have you with us, listening along, and it always brings us great joy. We hope that today your leadership is at a new level from what it was yesterday, and hope tomorrow it's even at a greater level. And to help us achieve that, I'm joined as always by Richard Blackaby.
It's good to be with you again, Sam.
Always a pleasure. So how are those Sabres doing?
First place in the NHL.
Still.
By the time this broadcast, that probably will have changed, but as we speak.
All right. Well, we'll
happy days.
Keep checking in with you. And
I'll tell you when to stop asking.
Yeah. If there's a long silence about the Sabres, then we know that it's
things
shaping
have
up
gone
to
as
be
they have in the past. Yes.
The season that it always is. So what are we looking at today to help take our leadership to the next level?
Sam, I want us to talk today about the danger of micromanaging. And micromanaging is a topic that I think inevitably you have to address in leadership talks, and I think this is the time.
Yeah. So when you say micromanaging, what do you mean by that?
Well, I think the way I would define it is when you oversee every detail of what an employee or a volunteer does. So whether you oversee, you scrutinize, you may take the decision making away from the person that works under you, but when you are overly involved in someone else's work that you supervise.
And I wonder, this is probably a spectrum of micro managers. So how do we deal with that?
Well, there's a lot to be said about that, Sam. And I think, of course, there are a range, but I think at a certain point you cross the line into micromanaging. You're managing. You may be a very engaged manager, a very involved manager, but at a certain point, if you take too much away from the employee or the volunteer, you've just moved from hands-on managing to micromanaging.
Right. And obviously some people have a propensity for this and some people don't. I mean, are there character traits and types of leaders to look out for?
Well, I don't know if it's character traits, but there are reasons why people
so why
micromanage.
Why would some people tend to be micromanagers?
Well, I think ultimately it comes from a lack of trust that the person you're managing is going to do the job right. Now, you may be a perfectionist, and so nobody ends up being able to do the job right.
Right.
Or you just don't have confidence in a particular person or a process, but because you don't trust that they can get it done, you hover and you engage yourself far more than you should. And, one of the problems with micromanaging is if I deal with a micromanager, typically they've got the wrong focus. They have the wrong goal. Because a manager, a leader, their goal should not be that they do everything perfectly themselves. Their goal should be that they find other people who can do the work adequately or even better, so that now the manager or the leader is now free to engage in other things. When you're micromanaging your staff, you don't have time to be looking for new work or bettering yourself or looking for new possibilities and potential for the future. When you're micromanaging, you're way, way too obsessed and concerned with the day-to-day of someone else's work, so you don't have time to do your own work. And so oftentimes I find that what drives a person to be a micromanager is they forget why they're managing in the first place. They're not managing to get this job done just the way they want it done necessarily. They're managing so that they can equip other people to carry on the work themselves, so that as a manager, you can back away. Now you can look to invest in other things. But when a person micromanages, there's several reasons they do that. One is because they've just hired poorly. If you feel like you can't trust the person you hired, you first got to ask, why did you hire them? And I've seen this happen. I've seen even large organizations that hired a CEO sometimes, and then they almost immediately had to hire an executive coach to try to work with the CEO because they were just concerned they couldn't do the job. And I would say, well, if you've got to do intervention almost as soon as you hire someone, you probably just didn't hire well. And so if you have to micromanage everybody that's working with you, either you really are just a micromanager or you're really bad at hiring. I would say hire someone that you can trust. Hire someone that has credibility so that you don't have to worry all the time that they're going to make a mistake. So people that micromanage, first of all, it may be that they're just not getting good staff. And of course, sometimes, and I know this happens sometimes, for instance, in the fast food industry, where if you're only able to pay minimum wage, you're not always going to get high level executive leadership, applying for the job.
Sure.
You're probably going to get some people that require more supervision, but I would argue that even at the lowest levels, you should be developing leaders and giving them opportunities to excel and to grow. So hire well is the first one, but also just basically a lack of trust. And it may be you don't trust them because they're just not good employees, but there are people that just typically just don't trust people, and they worry. Well, what if this person messes up? How will that look on me? What will that do to the company? How much money might that cost?
Yeah.
And so we lead in fear, and we're so afraid of what could happen that our managing actually becomes worse than our worst fear. We actually end up having more damage done by micromanaging than we would have had by someone just honestly making a mistake.
Yeah.
And so I'd say you got to decide, am I a person that can even trust people? Because if I'm just entirely untrusting of other people, I probably should not be a leader.
Yeah.
Because at some point there has to be a level of trust where you hand off work and responsibility to someone else, and that requires trust. And kind of along with that, I just know people that they worry too much. They're just worriers. And sometimes if it's your own business, for instance, maybe you've invested all of your life savings into your company and you just can't afford for someone to have a catastrophic error.
Yeah.
Well, you may worry about that, but at the same time, I would just say there are the others who just worry about all the possibilities of what could happen, and it's hard to focus on possibilities at the same time you're worrying about potential problems. And so you got to decide, if I'm a worrier, or if I just don't trust people like I should I even be in management in the first place? Because there is a certain risk that comes with leading. You're going to have to trust someone that you don't know as well as you know yourself. You don't know what lies behind some of their expressions of loyalty and confidence. But at some point, you take a risk that I'm going to give this person some responsibility, and I'm going to take my hands off, and I'm just going to watch and see how they do. And so that's another cause. And the one I've already touched on is just perfectionism.
Yeah.
Some people are just perfectionists, and no one can ever do the job as well as they can. And I would again say, if you're a perfectionist, you probably should not be in management. Go find a job that you can do by yourself that doesn't require other people's involvement, and then do it well. But if you're going to manage other people, you can push people to strive for excellence. You can push them to do better than they did last year. But just understand that leadership can get messy.
Yeah.
And people will mess up. And so if you are a perfectionist, then perhaps teach people how to do things well. But if you keep hovering over them and constantly reviewing and checking up on them and expressing basically a lack of confidence in their ability to do the job well, you're going to probably get what you look for. And if you're looking for, you just assume there's going to be problems, well, there probably will be problems, because nobody does good work if they've got the boss looking over their shoulder all the time.
Yeah. Well, I want to go back to this idea of this leader, perhaps that has dumped a lot of his own savings or her own savings into a company. Maybe they're growing their own business. They're an entrepreneur. Now they're hiring on staff. Now there's just this fear of no one cares for this thing like it's their own baby, like I do.
Yeah.
And so now handing that off, what are some ways to mitigate some of that, some of those issues that come with handing off some of those responsibilities to people without being a micromanager? Because I think a lot of times micromanaging comes out of a place of genuine care for whatever it is that the person's doing, and especially making that transition from maybe you're a solo entrepreneur to now hiring a team. the micromanaging comes from a place that they care deeply about this product or this company. How do you transition that?
Well, I think one thing is just don't give a huge assignment to someone right off the bat where they're pretty well destined to fail. Give people smaller bite-sized assignments and let them build a track record of success. And everybody has a limit. Everyone has a limit where you get past this certain capacity, and now they're in danger of making a mistake. And so a good leader kind of recognizes where people's limits are. And some people you'll figure out pretty quick, boy, they're a quick study. I mean, whatever I give them, they master it. They know how to do it better than I do. Before, a week later, boy, they're showing me stuff that they've already figured out that I didn't even know. So, boy, I can give them a lot of stuff,
And I don't think there's anything better as a leader than finding that person and realizing, wow, they're better at this job than I ever could have been.
Yeah, and so, you get someone like that, well, then very quickly you realize they've got a high capacity, so I can give them a whole lot more. Well, someone else learns slower, they're more timid, whatever else, so you just realize, okay, well, I can't give them huge assignments yet, but they do handle this kind of work adequately, so let me just give them this kind of work, and they've proven at this level that they do fine. So I don't need to micromanage that. Of course, a leader always puts in certain safeguards so that, for instance, a person can't ever spend more than this much money, or they can't make bigger than this commitment, or whatever else.
Sure.
And so you sort of minimize the risk, and you say, okay, well, if they do make a mistake, it's not going to be catastrophic. Or if it looks like they're going down the wrong path, they can't get all that far before I've got certain warning systems that will alert me. I better intervene here and check out what's going on. But when you're hovering over someone all the time, or you just take away all their responsibility, so that maybe you give them a task to do, but then you make all the decisions for their task.
Yeah.
Then if they don't get to make any meaningful decisions about the work that you've asked them to do, then that's a devastating thing. So you figure out what you can trust this person with, and then give them that work and let them do it. And you may want to check in once a month. You may check in at the end of every week to begin with. It may be 6 months or once a year, but you keep trying to release as much as you can. Anything that they can do, they should be doing. You don't hold on to anything yourself that your staff has already proven that they're fine to do themselves. And so that's, I think those are some things you can do to mitigate the risk. There's always some risk when you delegate. But those people that are so afraid of risk that they just constantly, they just sort of take away all the leadership ability and clout and responsibility, so that the person's nothing much more than just a puppet who just carries out your wishes. Right. That means you've got to be involved all the time in knowing what they're supposed to do next. And I would just say leaders have far more important work to do than basically doing the work of their employees.
Right. Well, I think this is just a very helpful topic, and we're going to dive in a little deeper right after this break.
Whether at home, on the job, or in the ministry, we can all have a greater impact on the world around us for the kingdom of God. Join Richard Blackaby at the Billy Graham Training Center at the Cove to learn about increasing your spiritual influence on April 6th through the 8th, 2020. Space is limited, so register soon at the link in the show notes.
So, Richard, before the break, we saw a little bit of why people micromanage, why leaders can fall into this trap of micromanaging. Can you walk us through some of the consequences? What happens to a company, to employees, perhaps to the leader themselves, if micromanaging is allowed to take its course?
Yeah, well, there's lots of disastrous consequences for that. One is you're going to never get your own work done, or you're going to be overworked because you're doing the work of 2 or more people. You should only be doing your work. You shouldn't be doing your employees' work.
Yeah.
And so when you're also taking on other people's work, and you're going and leading meetings they should lead, or you're making decisions they should be making, then you're going to be overworked yourself. And so that's, any micromanager is inevitably going to become stressed out. They're going to be poor at answering their own emails or doing their own work because they're so busy doing someone else's work. So one is, you're just not going to do your own work very well. Another thing is, you're just going to demoralize your staff. Like I don't. If I had someone that was constantly second guessing all my decisions, and constantly holding me accountable for things that I didn't perhaps even get the opportunity to decide myself, or if all the meaningful decisions of my work are made by my boss and not by me, well, I'll tell you what. It won't take me long until I'm looking for somewhere else to work. I'm not going to work somewhere where I am just basically eviscerated as a leader myself because my boss is a micromanager. And so what's going to happen is you'll demoralize people. They know that you're checking all the time. So at a certain point, if you work for a micromanager, you're not going to be creative. You're not going to try new things. You're not going to be dreaming of ways to do things better. Right. You're just going to just resign yourself. I just do what the boss says. I just wait for the boss to tell me what to do, and then that's what I do. Don't do any more, don't do any less, and then I won't get into any trouble. And so micromanagers tend to end up with very conformist, uncreative staff who show no initiative.
Well, the book 1984 comes to mind when you're explaining that, is that as a government that, you end up with just a bunch of
well, that's very much, that's communism basically, where you've got everybody being checked up and you just get told what to do. Don't ask any questions, just do what you're told. Yeah. And so at a certain point, that's what they do. And you're never going to be, you'll never thrive as an organization. Right. If you've just developed a bunch of yes men that just are so worried about you being in charge of everything that they just don't even try. They don't want to get in trouble. Instead of trying to make the place better, they're driven by a concern, just don't get in trouble because the boss is always checking up on you. And it also just says if you get a reputation for that you're not going to be attracting other leaders. Leaders don't want to work for micromanagers. I can tell you that. Now, there's maybe a certain amount of sheep out there that don't mind just being told, go here, go there. And if you want an organization filled with just sheep that don't ever ask questions, they don't want to be in charge. They don't want to make decisions. You just tell me what to do and I'll do it. Well, then that's who you will attract. But you will not attract leaders that could actually help take your organization to an entirely another level. And so micromanagers just inevitably end up with a very anemic kind of organization. And typically they have a high turnover. They can't hold on to people because, I found personally that sometimes I might not even be able to offer the most money, but if I can give people the opportunity to grow and try new things and freedom to fail, then that there's a lot of value in that. There's people that would actually take less money just to be able to have the freedom to grow personally and try things and do new things and dream. And, I love it personally when staff come to me and they say, hey, I was thinking about this and, what would you think if we tried this? And I read somewhere that you can get, great return on this. And, my response 99% of the time is that would be wonderful. Yeah. Go for it. I love having staff that are always dreaming of how to make things better. That's how you get great organizations, but you won't have that if you're a micromanager. You will knock the stuffing right out of your staff where it doesn't cross their mind to dream of anything new or fresh. And certainly anyone worth their salt is not going to hire on. Once you become known as a micromanager, no one that's any good as a leader is going to be thinking they'd like to work for you.
I imagine that some people listening either have these tendencies to be a micromanager or know that they are a micromanager. Yeah. Maybe just as we're wrapping up here, can you give us some tips or just some guidance on how to mitigate those tendencies that we see in ourselves to say, I could maybe train this person, or it's maybe faster if I just do it, or if that tendency in us to want to just keep our hands on everything and not let people do what they need to do.
Yeah. And I know there's a sort of a delusion that makes us think that things are just best if I've got my hand on everything. Right. But we don't recognize how much we're suppressing all that creativity and energy and morale among our staff. We don't see that. But we can begin to notice it with productivity, with high turnover rates among the staff. And so, some things I think you can do. One is take a hard look at just what drives you to be so fearful. Because, I mean, you're fearful that something's going to go wrong.
Yeah.
And so you're trying desperately to not have anything go wrong. And I'd say, why are you so afraid of that? What does your organization's success, is that directly linked to your own self-worth, that things have to be good? Find out why it is you are such a controlling person.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, if you're a real controlling person, you probably are not the kind of person that takes delight in investing in other people and seeing them grow. You're not a people-oriented person. You are a results-oriented person who wants certain results all the time.
Yeah.
But leadership is about people. And as a leader, you need to take delight in watching people grow. You ought to be able to look at all of your direct reports and year by year see that they're all growing, that they're taking on more responsibility every year than they were last year. And they're getting more production, more results. That ought to just be a great reward for you. Not that, boy, we didn't have any mistakes made this year.
Yeah.
But instead to be saying, wow, like we look at just how much these people have grown since they work with me.
And for those fears, it would quantifying those fears also help mitigate some of those fears to, because I think if you just let them rattle around, they tend to be bigger than they are. But if you just say, okay, if the worst case, this person blows this job, what actually is going to happen?
Yeah.
Versus just like, oh, it's going to be bad.
Yeah. So
and
you
then,
have, like you, and you've done this before, but so someone hires you to manage one of their stores. Well, a person might be worried, well, what if they just make a lot of terrible mistakes? What if they just, commit the store to some purchases or things that are horrible and very costly? But I would say, but at this point, they haven't ever done that. So first of all, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to check their track record before I hire them to see that they don't have a track record of that. But if everything they've led before has been well led and well managed and profitable, I'm going to assume that they're going to do that here too. So I'm going to give them the wide parameters and say, anything over this, I'd like you to check with me. But anything under that, that's for you. Now, if you mess up with that, I may have to reduce what you're responsible for. But if you keep on handling that level of responsibility, I'm going to come back and I'm going to give you more responsibility. And I'm going to just keep on trusting you with as much as you seem capable of handling. And so you got to, I think, you may want to initially have certain safeguards, but keep an eye on that. And if they keep proving themselves trustworthy over and over again, then at a certain point, you've got to release more and more.
Right.
And that's the problem with micromanagers is they just have a hard time ever releasing. They always want to keep things on a really short leash. And because of that, they're so focused on managing these people's day-to-day activities that leaders don't have time to actually look to the future and increase their own ability to lead. I'd say a micromanager is someone who's never learned how to lead well themselves. So you need to take time to learn how to lead. Invest in your own leadership development so that you're not a micromanager anymore.
Well, good. I think this is a great place to end it. And until next time.
All right.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If this is something you enjoyed, it really makes a difference if you leave a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. We always love hearing from our listeners, so email us at podcast@blackaby.org.